and welcome to Dive into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara. Streaming live on WJZZ, Cool TV, streaming every Saturday, 1 to 2 p.m. You can like, share, subscribe, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Zahara?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Zahara. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Today we're going to be discussing a lot about environmentalism. Our guest for today is going to be Andrew Nowicki. He is the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party Environmental Caucus. He himself is also an environmentalist and works in the field of environmentalist as well as a teacher and advocate. So today we're going to be talking a lot about what it is that's happening with the environment, as well as what that means for youth to get involved and how we can get involved. Zahara? Did you want to add anything?
No, I think that pretty much covered it. I mean, the environment is something that's a topic that's going around a lot right now, and it is something that we definitely have to take care of, especially in Michigan, where we are surrounded by the Great Lakes that supply 20% of the world's water, and yet in some parts are neglected. And we need to take care of that.
Yeah, so Michigan's a really unique state for us to have a focus on environmentalism. Like Zahara is saying, is we have the Great Lakes, which I think sometimes we forget about them, especially living in like Southeast Michigan where we're not looking at them every day. But they really are a unique treasure to the state. And it's something that has been coming under attack recently. We mentioned a little bit about Line 5 in our past episodes. And so we'll probably expand a little bit upon some of those things you've heard us talk about, but not really dive into. So today, that's what we're going to be diving into, is the environmentalism and youth's role in it.
Yeah, and what is it that we as individuals who are not working in the environmental field, what is it that we can do to help and to make others aware so we can take care of, we can continue taking care of our environment?
Yeah, some small changes that maybe each of us can do on our own, or some larger group changes that we can do with partnerships throughout various areas in the state. So with that being said, we definitely want you to call into today's conversation if you have questions or comments, especially if you have concerns in your own area about the environment that we've yet to address. And you can give us a call at 313-355-6018. And we're just waiting for our guest to join us for today. Some other updates of things that are happening throughout the state. We've got lots of events going on this month. I encourage you to definitely attend a Pride event. Ypsi, where I'm from, had its first Ypsi Pride, or its third or fourth Ypsi Pride last night, actually. So keep an eye around for different events that are happening in your area.
What else was I was going to
I
bring
don't
up
know.
an
You had
event.
something
I
to
was gonna,
say.
yeah, I was gonna bring up an event. I completely forgot. I'll come back later. Hopefully.
Too many events going on for you, Zahara?
Yes, too many. Between all the campaigns in the group, yes, too many. So
yeah, and as campaign season's starting to kick up as well, I would definitely encourage you to volunteer for some of your local campaigns. There's lots of city council races, mayoral races, some county commissioner races. So, you may not have the presidential election to get involved in and be part of this cycle, but you do have the chance to really change things at your local level.
Yeah, and local elections are really important, although by a lot of people they are sometimes forgotten or neglected. But they do change a lot about the area that you are living in, so they are important to pay attention to.
And we've got a caller on the line with us. Or we did. Sorry about that. Looks like we lost that call. Yep, looks like that call disappeared. Well, if you were trying to call and give us a call back and let us know what you were asking about. We're just waiting to get things started here, waiting on Andrew to join us. Technical things are always a fun thing to tackle, as we saw from me climbing on the floor in our first episode to fix the sound.
It's okay. Those will all get written in our big book of adventures one of these days.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. This is all a learning experience, guys. It really is, and that's what we're here to do, is just kind of try to learn together. So, well, I guess I can share my story of how I got involved in environmentalism. So for me, environmentalism is actually one of the big things that got me involved in politics. My background is food ethics, which people look at me and go, "What do you mean food ethics?" Because that sounds kind of weird, but it's the study of where our food comes from and looking at our food system and seeing, how does it affect the farmer to the producer to the company to the customer. So for me, I got really involved looking at where does our food come from, and then realizing the environmental impact that that has on us. And then I got more involved when I discovered that there is actually a pipeline running through Ypsilanti, and that made me realize that we have to get involved and do something faster because things we weren't aware of were there. Andrew, great to see you.
Hello.
Hey,
Is my audio coming through all right? We can hear me
coming in perfectly.
perfectly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to join us today. We were just telling the audience that we're going to be discussing some environmental issues today, and we gave them a brief introduction as to who you are. But if you'd like to take it away and go ahead and introduce yourself, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my name's Andrew Nowicki, and I'm chair of the MDP Environmental Caucus. And in my work life, I've got a degree in zoology. I'm also a naturalist and an environmental educator, and also ran for drain commissioner in Livingston County last cycle. So I got several hats to switch back and forth here, and I'm hoping that on the show today we can talk a little bit about the environmental caucus, but also about some of the naturalist stuff too, and enjoying wildlife. And I feel like it's important sometimes to step back and appreciate what it is that we're exactly fighting for. And I think enjoying the outdoors is a great way to recognize that.
Yeah, most definitely.
For sure.
Especially in Michigan, where you're super close to rivers and streams and lakes all the time, as well as so many hiking trails. Like there's a lot of opportunities to really get out there in nature, kind of reground yourself. Get outside of the policy of it for a second. I love that idea. We'll definitely talk about that. I'd love to hear some good areas that you've gone to for our audience to maybe to check out themselves. Yeah, so I mean, Andrew, we kind of wanted to start off with asking you, how did you get started in politics and environmentalism? What was that thing that just made you go this path?
Oh boy. Well, I guess in a broader sense, I've always been on the environmental track and the naturalist track. Like I thought I was going to be a zoologist when I was, in second grade as a kid, and I started learning to identify turtles and birds. And when you get really into that kind of thing, it's inescapable that we're facing some very serious problems right now. Climate change, habitat loss, degradation of habitat, pollution, these things are seriously impacting these animals. And it's been very true for me where I've met a lot of mentors along the way. And this includes, you go to a college class, and of course, your professor is going to be, sometimes double your age, much older generation, because they're passing on their knowledge to you. But what they describe as being the environment from when they were my age doesn't exist anymore. There are sites that, like, I had a mentor that would talk about, going out and we'd find blue racers and ribbon snakes and all these different things, places that just don't exist anymore, especially with the ocean. Like I had a professor that talked about ocean sites that were once considered some of the best sites in the world to see biodiversity, and they don't exist. So when you get into naturalism and you're really interested in like exploring environmental science and biology, the politics is inescapable because we're losing animals. In total, there's less animals today than there was 20 years ago. You can think about it that way. And we're also losing biodiversity, and we're losing our ecosystem services. And if you really care, how can you not get involved politically when you're aware of all that stuff going on and you're actually studying it, as a profession? But I think more than that, what really clicked for me that actually got me involved and connected me with the network and the people was Bernie Sanders' message in 2015 when he had just started his presidential campaign. And at the time, I was struggling with a lot of issues about like uncertainty about my future. So, of course, I care about climate change because it's taking away, threatening 2/3 of all species of birds in North America. But it also means that, these are consequences that people feel too. This is going to impact my health. This is going to impact my financial stability when I'm thinking about retiring from climate change. And at the same time, the job prospects for people in my field are not looking good, where even with a master's degree, you're looking at about $15 an hour for a starter job, which is pretty typical in my field, is a master's degree for 15. And Bernie's message was that if you're a working person, you should just be able to survive off of the job, and that a job, it should be something that lifts somebody out of poverty, not keeps them in it. And I think that was really igniting to me as well, because I was like, yeah, like I shouldn't be working my butt off to not actually get a living wage. And millions of people are doing the same thing. But also, I grew up where, in some ways I was very fortunate, but like my mom has always struggled with healthcare. And I've been in those situations where you have to, like, you're with someone that you really care about, and they're forced between a decision of, do I go to the hospital and bankrupt myself for another, couple of years to pay this back, or do I just try to stay at home and bear with this, pain and this whatever disease that I don't even know what's going on, and avoid seeing a doctor. And I did some study abroads when I was in college. I went to Japan, where you can call an ambulance and it doesn't cost you anything. In America, it costs you about $800. And traveling through other countries too, where you just see there's a better way to do this than we do it here. And Bernie had the motion that spoke to me, which is that, people should just be able to go to the hospital because they're people, and it should be a human right. And I got involved with that message.
Yeah, it's really good. So just to expand on like some of the stuff that you touched on, what would you say are the 3 biggest environmental issues facing Michigan today?
I know it's
well, there's a couple different ways you can do about that. So do you want like point issues, which I could say one of them is line 5, is a single issue. I mean, PFAS, line 5, and probably water security. I would put as maybe like a third if I had to pick 3. Water security is in like, can you actually turn your faucet and get water? And if you can turn it on, can you actually trust the water that comes out to be safe? A lot of, we have a lot of different places that have different types of water issues. A lot of Michigan actually gets them through well water. In the cities, they have different, sourcing and such like that. But there's communities where people don't even have access to turn the faucet on in the first place, which was thankfully temporarily amended with Governor Whitmer's coronavirus order that mandated all the water to be shut back on. But lots of people struggle with that all the time. If you're looking more broadly than 3 specific issues, because I feel like it's easy to get caught in the weeds of, line 5 is a big battle. It's this pipeline underneath the Mackinac Straits that is honestly, it's like over 50 years old. It's a ticking time bomb to destroy the greatest asset that we have in our state. But even when you solve that issue, once we get that line out of the water, there's still all these other things that are coming in, to impact the Great Lakes. So it's like, it seems like it's never ending. So I think if we were to zoom out a little bit and say, what are the issues that we really need to tackle? I'd say one of the top 3 would be polluter pay, which is that right now in Michigan, if you are a polluter, if you're some business or even some private individuals, depends on what it is, and you pollute the environment in any form, as long as you somehow take away your assets from that land, you're not liable to pay for that pollution. And if it isn't cleaned up immediately, over time, it becomes increasingly expensive to do that. And this happened in Ann Arbor, where a facility contaminated the groundwater supply. And before it was contaminated, there were several environmental lawsuits that said, hey, you need to clean this thing up. If you don't clean it up, it's going to leach into the groundwater. And so 20 years of legislation later, they didn't clean it up, and now it's in the groundwater. And now filtering something out of the entire groundwater underneath Ann Arbor is a whole lot more complicated than just stopping the pollution at that source from where it was. And the main reason these things don't get cleaned up is because the polluters themselves aren't liable. So that just becomes a passing the blame back and forth until nobody pays for it and nothing happens. And there's thousands and thousands of sites across Michigan that are all the same problem, where we have pollution that needs to be cleaned up, but nobody wants to pay for it. And the company that did it picked up and moved somewhere else, and suddenly they think they're not liable anymore. So I definitely want to elevate polluter pay as one of our top issues.
Yeah.
I can keep going if you want to ask questions.
So I know something that Senator Irwin were recently talking about that he's been trying to get introduced, but there's so much pushback from special interests, from lobbyists. Let's just be honest that there's still a lot of Republican control that's definitely causing some of this to be delayed. But I can think about, you're talking about something recent. I mean, in Ypsilanti, we have a land spot. We call it Water Street, and it's from a factory that was there before I was born. So we're talking like 20, 30, 40 years ago, that did the same thing you're talking about. They just left the land polluted, ruined. Now the city owns it, and the city we can't clean it up. We don't have the money to clean it up. And so it takes an outside company to now come in and to say, yeah, we're going to clean up that land. But who is that company?
Yeah.
We've got a caller calling in. Hi there. Can you hear us, caller?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. What did you want to add to the discussion?
I was just wondering, you had said that you had gone to other countries and seen ways that it could be done better. Like, what sort of ways do you think that you've seen in other countries implement here in America?
Yeah, so I can't go into the details because I can't say that I went to those countries to study their policy and like really know how that mechanism works. But what I can speak for is that when I went to Japan, some of us that stayed a little bit longer, for the basic visa, you wouldn't get the healthcare package, but for some of us that in the group that stayed for the extended time, they classified under the some healthcare plan under the Japanese system. And it was advised to us as students that if you were on the extended plan, you should pick up any like weird prescriptions that you need there, or you should get like your contacts and glasses filled because those are all cheaper. And people can actually like afford those things more so there. So that was recommended to us. And then I was also informed that if we had some kind of emergency and we were there, we could reliably call emergency services and know that we would be taken to a hospital and we would be taken care of. And maybe it's a little bit different for me not being actually a citizen there. I don't know how that works, but people don't go bankrupt riding an ambulance. Whereas here, I know people who have had situations that required the ambulance call, and before you even get to the hospital, you're hit with that $800 bill. And if you're somebody who doesn't have $800 in savings, plus more than that, and to the insurance. This is somebody who was insured, by the way, with good health insurance, had to pay $100 for that hospital visit. So I feel like I can't speak to the policies of Japan. I just know that when I was there, I was in a place where I felt like people could call an ambulance and not worry about going bankrupt by going to the doctor because they needed an emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for answering my question.
Thank you for calling in and asking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.
You too.
Love
Thank
talking to
you. So it sounds like a cultural change, like a completely different vibe that you had being there. And I'm glad you bring up healthcare, because you can't talk about the environment and not talk about health, because like you mentioned, we have to save the land itself, but it impacts us in a negative way. I know we talk a lot about air quality and water quality. Do you see polluter pay as the solution for that, or do we also have to attack another direction?
No, that's a whole other, that gets into environmental justice. So polluter pay is going to come in when you have a company that's like on a tract of land and they're polluting that tract of land with some kind of contaminant. Could be anything. Where environmental justice comes in is where you have maybe a factory and they're actually spewing something up into the air, or maybe they're dumping something into the water supply where it's not so much contained within that area. It's actually constantly going out and contaminating the environment. Like we have communities in Michigan where entire blocks of people are just getting cancer because of all the things that they're breathing in and drinking in with the polluted water. And that, even if you had a polluter pay system, at least to the way that they're proposed right now, that's not going to cover those types of issues. That's going to be something different. And part of the reason that we have that problem is that the way that the EPA goes about trying to protect our environment is that they have a calculation where they put a value on a human life, and I don't want to say the wrong number, so I can't remember how many $1 million they estimate a human life is worth in this calculation. And then they think about if we have a standard and it's going to kill this many people, and this many people are worth this many $1 million, and we times that together, then they can look at how much would it cost to clean it up versus how many lives are being lost. and then they look for the most cost-effective solution to that, and that's how they make those standards, and they go about not enforcing them, honestly, because when you don't follow EPA standards, you're just in a state of non-compliance, and the punishment for being in non-compliance is being in non-compliance. There's no teeth to it, so you could be spewing, things out, and the EPA might never enforce it. But another issue from that is even within that system, each standard is only looking at that specific compound that's being out in the air. And if you have a multitude of factories and kind of industry in the area, you've got a multitude of different chemicals that are in the air that people are breathing in, and they don't take that into account. They're only looking at each one individually. So there's new movements within the environmental justice movement that are looking at the tangible effects from everything, compounding all those different things together. And I think that I don't think there's a panacea to that issue, but I think that looking at those health impacts as a group instead of individually, and also rethinking our EPA system as it is right now of valuing human life by this many dollars and then trying to basically make it most cost effective for industry instead of actually valuing human life for what it is. I think if our system was built upon a value of human life instead of a value around dollars, and then we evaluate human life in terms of dollars, I think we'd be seeing very different solutions being proposed here.
That's just honestly disgusting to me that we're putting $1 on a human
Yeah,
life in the first place.
I think those stuff doesn't happen, but then no politics, it all happens, and it's like yeah, you wish these things didn't happen, but I mean and it's like a lot of people do not realize that the further the earth declines in environmental, the harder it is to make it good again.
Yeah, we can't really unwind a lot of this damage. We can only stop the damage, is at least how I put it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you can unwind it, but it might just take 10 million years.
I don't think we have enough time for that.
So,
at least the three of us.
So, I mean, give us a more reasonable time, Andrew. So, I mean, with that, what would you say is the biggest environmental challenge we have to overcome?
If you had to choose one.
This is gonna sound kind of lame. The biggest challenge to environmental issues is actually making it part of the conversation at every single level. So put this in the context, we've known about climate change since the 60s. We've known that CO2 was probably a very risky experiment. That's what it used to be called, was an experiment, because scientists didn't really know the full connection of what spewing massive amounts of CO2 and methane in the atmosphere would be doing. But I mean, the science kind of got figured out towards like the 80s and 90s. We knew climate change is happening. This is a problem. And 2000, Inconvenient Truth happens, and now we're 20 years later after that. And just this year, we've won 2 major victories in the national level and at the state level. So there's a group that has to approve all new energy infrastructure projects. And as of this year, they now have to consider climate change when they're making their decision. And Michigan Public Service Commission, there's been a similar, very landmark change, where now the Michigan Public Service Commission, which is similarly for Michigan, they make decisions on any energy infrastructure going on in our state. They have to consider climate change in their decision. And what that means is that even though we knew about climate change going back way, way, way back before even this century, we just weren't talking about it. We weren't even involving it in the decision-making process. It was just assuming that this is not going to happen, assuming climate change has no negative consequences, what kind of decisions would we make? And so now we're only just now starting to actually think about it. And I feel like those are 2 major victories, but I feel like we haven't really gone far enough in that every single act of designing, landscaping, infrastructure, community planning needs to involve some kind of environmental conversation, and you need to get information about what the damages are going to be to the environment. And on a macro scale, if you have a shift in culture from moving away from like the green lawn. I could talk about lawns all day, but it's just a simple thing that if we had something besides that green lawn, instead of having something that is a source of pollution, now you've got something in every community everywhere that is actually a source of cleaning up water and cleaning up air. You know, you can actually have that reversed. You can have something working for you instead of against you. And all these environmental solutions that require these really big picture ideas, big thinking, the first step is actually having the environment as part of that conversation. And that's not, believe it or not, that is not something that takes place at many levels of government today. You know, you still might have somebody building some facility and they've got certain laws they have to follow. So they'll hire someone to make sure that we're not breaking any environmental laws here and there. There's an endangered species on the property, but as long as we sign some paperwork that says that we're going to put money into a wetland over here, we can just plow over that. And we don't even think about the greater picture with the environment. So I think that needs to be the first shift, is that we need to actually consider the environment at every level. And especially if you're an agency in charge of designing energy infrastructure, you need to be thinking about climate change and actually have some data when you're making your decisions. Preferably 20 years ago, but we started doing it now.
Yeah, I mean,
I think we were telling people a reminder about the local elections that are coming up, and you're talking about stuff that's making me think about sitting in Ipsy City Council meetings and how, like, I know there's one city council candidate, city councilwoman, Annie Somerville, who's pretty aware of this, but they're talking about like housing development, and no one's thinking about like environmentally sustainable, renewable, urban gardens, none of that kind of thing, except one of our council members. And they're trying to think long term instead of short term, but like that's just not the norm for our local electeds. And that's somewhere where I think, you know, when you think about your city council's approving what businesses come into town, they can put in things that say, you know, you must have 20% renewable, or we want you to have so much invested in this program that's going towards environmental, or you must require recycling as a simple thing. But I think you're right that, you know, the environment just doesn't come into the discussions about new businesses, about developments, like be it that small little part where they have to sign a couple pieces of paperwork. But it's not the central focus.
Yeah, for a lot of people, for a lot of things. But to build on that, since we did talk about like election, what qualities or environmental issue stances do you look for when supporting somebody? And how could, and to expand on that, like how can we make them more aware of these issues?
Well, there's a couple different ways. So one of the ways, my environmental educator hat tells me, point out all the different types of wildlife and things that exist outside that we just don't know about. And I found that so many audiences across the state are surprised to learn that the things that they are paying somebody to remove from their lawn are actually edible, and some of them have medicinal like purposes. So we have food insecurity issues in our own state, and we're actually paying people to spray and poison edible plants to get them off of our area. And not just edible for people, but edible for, you know, wildlife and such too. So I think that from one angle, you can say, you know, hey, I really care about having cool stuff. I'm green and I want to have habitat for birds, and I want to have habitat for snakes and things because I think they're cool and I really value that. But I don't think everyone necessarily, you know, has that inner, you know, like animals are so cute side to them, even though I wish they did. But I think at the very, very least, if you're looking at a candidate, do they understand basic environmental science in terms of like, a wetland isn't just a wetland where a bunch of stinky things go out there and swim in the water. A wetland is acting as a reservoir for stormwater. A wetland is filtering water as it goes through. It's actually removing contaminants and the processes that are going through that wetland. A wetland is also where a lot of our bioindicator species are going. You know, this is where sources of drinking water, purifying the air. And think about those things at the very least. Even if you don't really care about the frogs, you know, you need to care about having clean drinking water, having clear air to breathe, having somewhere for the water to go when it rains really, really heavy. And when you compound that, not thinking about those issues over time, even very well-meaning areas can have problems. So look at Belle Isle in Detroit. Belle Isle was designed by a pretty famous landscape developer, this guy Olmsted. If you Google the name Olmsted, it's like he designed Central Park, a bunch of other really high-profile locations, in the early 1900s. And when he designed Belle Isle, the first thing that he noticed is, oh my gosh, there's mosquitoes everywhere, and these wetlands are everywhere, and I want to get rid of them. So he got rid of most of the wetlands on Belle Isle, and it's a nature area. I mean, it's very cool. There's so much stuff to do. There's so much stuff to see. But guess what? Belle Isle's having flooding issues nowadays. So they actually have like a pump system that they try to use to get the water out, so that way it doesn't actually flow like into the road. There are areas where they have to close roads because the water goes up and it actually makes the thing underwater. And part of that's climate change. Climate change is adding to the ferocity of our storms, but also part of it is just that this dude, who was a landscape developer 100 years ago or so, didn't think that, hey, removing all these wetlands might create some flood problems in the future. So having at least a architectural sense of what ecosystems do, I think that's like a bare minimum, honestly, for me, for candidates. You need to understand this minimum part. And most of them don't, to be frank. This just isn't part of our conversation. It's not part of our education either.
Yeah, and you guys are watching Dive into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara, streaming on WJZZ Cool TV, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Like, follow, share, comment, and subscribe. If you guys would like to sponsor or advertise, you can email WJZZTVofficial@gmail.com.
Yeah. I think what you said there is really important at the end there, Andrew. It's not in our education. So we're not like, I mean, I don't remember like a field trip to a wetlands. I mean, I remember going to the zoo.
Yeah,
like a field trip to the zoo.
But then the zoos themselves are like, not the best.
No,
and
so like,
thing, but
it seems to me that if we really want to fix some of it, we do have to talk about education in it, and we have to have somewhere more of a focus on that. Because I'd like to think that I'm a pretty knowledgeable person about the environment, but I can tell you right now, like, it didn't dawn on me about Belle Isle being like what it is, like why it's flooding. I had no idea about that. Now that makes sense to me. So like, we really have to find a way to fix our education system to be teaching people about, how we take care of the planet. We've lost that connection to the earth, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's so much, like you said, that connection lost, and it's just so much that there's a lot of places that want things easier and not thinking like, okay, if you make things, or if you change the way things are done, well, okay, it might be easier for right now, but it's going to create so many problems down the line, especially like the health issues. I know in like Healthy Dearborn, when we were looking at the different areas in Dearborn, we saw that one of our most polluted places, the health disparities in that area were so much more than, in other locations in Dearborn, even if they weren't far away, even if they were, not that far away. And that was because of the factories and like, the air quality over there. So that also plays into the, people's health.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think about knocking doors in the River Rouge area, and my friends didn't really believe me, but as soon as you cross into that River Rouge area, the air just feels thicker, like, and it has this smell to it, and you just kind of feel like I have almost an instinct in me that says, okay, I need to leave this location. Like, I shouldn't be here. Like, this is bad for me. And people live there.
Yeah.
And I was going to their neighborhood to knock doors where these families live. And when I was in that neighborhood, you would talk to someone, they'd say, well, I had cancer, she had cancer, he had cancer, they just died from cancer, they just recovered from cancer. I mean, one door standing on that street pointing at like 5 different houses.
Well, yeah, and the asthma rates that are going, especially in the younger generation these days, because of the air quality in so many places. Like, that all plays like, down the line, they get something as they're younger, and that's going to affect their health and their quality of life even further as they grow up.
Yeah. So I guess I don't really know how we can tackle the education issue, but I think that that's definitely a part of, again, having environmentalism in our conversation. We look at, what are we requiring for our curriculum for our children? Are we requiring a Michigan unit? If we still have Michigan units in elementary, we should require something about the Great Lakes and the environmental impact it has. So kind of tweaking some of that in some way, because I do think that, I was fortunate to grow up with a mom and dad that took me up north all the time. And we have a little trailer, and we would just go hiking. We have what I call a dead lake. It's a muck lake behind my cousin's property that we would go look at frogs and identify them. But that's not everyone's experience.
Yeah.
I have a very fortunate grandpa that grew up like in the hills of Kentucky going nature hiking. Like that was unique to us. But my friends, like they would go on vacation to like, you know, Miami or like they're going to Orlando. So they're going to these big giant cities and they've lost that connection to just sitting in the woods and writing, which is something that I do love to do.
Yeah, and I've had the same experience as Leah because my dad loves camping and being out in nature and going hiking and stuff, and so he taught us all of that when we were young. So we're all like to some degree like that. Like camping is one of, you know, just being out in nature and being away from all of this stuff is just a great way to, you know, relax and just see what's around, especially like by a lake or something.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, Andrew, that you do a lot of like naturalistic kind of like going back into nature. How did you get into that, or where would you recommend, or how would you recommend someone start doing that? I know you do like bird watching and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually have a website, and I do programming and such, right? I basically either on Zoom teach people about the different types of wildlife that they can see in Michigan, or I do an actual hike where people go out and we just look for different things and we point it out right then and there that we see. And I think what's really critical about some of these things is first of all, knowing what's out there. I found that a lot of audiences, even if you've lived in Michigan your whole life, don't really have an understanding of like what wildlife is out there in Michigan. Because even if you're spending a lot of time outside, some things are really, to use a fancy word, inconspicuous. They're hard to see. So like if you go out hiking in the woods and you're paying attention, you're going to see, you know, robins, you're going to see deer, you're going to see turkey, because they're really big animals. And as long as you're paying attention to something, you're probably going to notice those are by. But you might not notice something like a giant swallowtail caterpillar, which is out in the open, but it looks like literal bird poop. And it does that on purpose because it doesn't want to get eaten. It's a bird poop caterpillar. Yeah, the giant swallowtail butterfly. So if you're outside and you don't know that there's this caterpillar that lives in this tree that looks like bird poop, you could walk past it your entire life and never know that it was there. And so I think people are surprised on some of my programs to learn that, like, wow, we have a lot more different types of wildlife and cool things than I initially maybe would have thought. But another side to that is I think for those of us that are lucky and that we did get that more, you know, special education as a child, and we got to go out, you know, even to like the zoo or like a nature center on a hike or camping, the education that you often get is that here, this is a green frog. It lives by the wetland. It eats bugs. It has a thunk sound that it makes, and it hops in the water. And that's about it. And then when you talk to people about like job prospects, you know, people think, okay, so you're a zoologist. So you talk about how the frog is green and it goes thunk and it lives by the wetland and it eats insects. And like, you know, maybe they think it's a little bit more detailed than that, but they don't really see, there's no value to it, right? Well, what is this thing doing? It's because we kind of exclude the ecosystem service aspect of our education. You know, so we don't talk about how amphibians breathe through their skin, which means that they're very vulnerable to pollutants and contaminants, especially in the egg stage. So that if you have something that's polluting the water or polluting the area, the frogs are going to get it a lot quicker, and they're going to get sick and they're going to stop reproducing before you're going to start seeing issues in people. So it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine for your habitat health is your frog life. And other things like, you know, the northern water snake is one of the few species that will eat something like a goby, which is an invasive freshwater fish that we have in the Great Lakes. Not a whole lot of things eat them. Water snakes do. And so I don't want to, I think it takes away from some of the amazement about these animals to try to always look at it in terms of, okay, what does this animal do for people? But at the same time, I think it's very weird that what does this animal do for people has been excluded from the education that we've actually received since we were young. And that's starting to change, but not nearly fast enough, in my opinion.
Yeah. So in general, youth are starting to take a more active role in politics and such. So concerning the environment, what is the youth role in all of this, and in what ways can the youth get involved?
So I think one of the things that when I think of youth, and not just because I'm 27. I just turned 27. I should say that now. So I mean, I'm still young, right? I'm not there yet. So when I think about environmental issues, like this is literally your bill. I mean, essentially, when you have environmental degradation, it's that you're passing on some kind of a cost onto future generations. You're saying that I'm not going to pay for this now. My child is going to pay for it, or my grandchildren are going to pay for it. And if you're my age, or especially younger than my age, that's you. You're the one who's going to be paying for this. So when your city or your local government isn't taking care of the environment, who's the person who's going to have to eventually finance or fix all these problems? It's you. Or you're going to get sick and get cancer, which is honestly very plausible. That happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I think that for young people, it's real. I think we have a sense of like it being more real than maybe someone who's like, maybe retirement age and they really care, but at the same time, they're not really going to be around to have to actually face the consequences of the actions that we're making right now, going to the future. So I think young people, we have an energy that I think other people can't have because we know this is us. This is our future at stake here. What can you do? I have a couple things. One of them is really simple, is know about what kind of systems and wildlife are in your area. There has been many, many documented cases where there's an area that's about to be like developed or something, or they're changing something. And development isn't always a bad thing. You can develop in a smart way, which I think people should realize more. But they didn't know that like there was an endangered bat species at this site, or they didn't know that there was a threatened species of frog at this site. And if there had been anybody in that community who prior had known that that animal was there and had been able to alert people early on, they potentially could have saved that site. And this has happened over and over again here in Michigan. So knowing about what kind of animals are out there and knowing what kind of like the things in your community do to contribute, knowing that like a wetland is a water sequestration and water filtration ecological service, that can make a difference because it means that you can have a voice. And even if they steamroll it anyway, they won't get away with steamrolling it without knowing that it was an issue, and you can actually raise that thing up. I also want to encourage people to volunteer for campaigns that actually are meaningful, and also consider running for office yourself, because ultimately it takes people being in office to actually make these changes. And sometimes even if you don't win, like I ran for drain commissioner in Livingston County, it's a very red area. Just running meant that environmental issues got in the newspaper. People started talking about environmental issues around the Drain Commission, and we had a climate, I'm not going to call it a debate, but there was a back and forth and the Drain Commissioner race about climate change, and that made front lines on a local news media as well. So even if it wasn't, I'd still say it's a successful campaign, even though I didn't actually become Drain Commissioner, because you're changing the conversation and you're influencing the conversation just by running. That's a long list of things. I didn't mean to overwhelm the audience.
I hope you were taking note.
Yeah. Important, things to talk about. So before we move on to our next question, I'd just like to take a pause to wish my mom a happy birthday. Sorry I had to get away from the house for a little bit, but happy birthday, Mom. I love you.
Yeah. She's one of our biggest supporters and watches the show every week, so we really appreciate you. Andrew, I liked what you said about encouraging people to run. So when you ran for Drain Commission, was that really the first time that they'd had like a competitive conversation, like race and like a conversation about it? Like, it wasn't like, the bottom of the ballot box and maybe people will vote for it?
Yeah, I don't remember the number off the top of my head anymore, and I don't want to misquote it, but I was the first person to run for that seat from a Democrat ticket for Drain Commissioner in a very long time. The person who is currently the commissioner has been running unopposed for many, many cycles.
Wow, so you really did change the conversation in that aspect.
Yeah, there was actually, and his billboards, his signs said the environmental choice at the bottom. It was Brian John Kerry, the environmental choice at the bottom, which I feel like was definitely influenced by my running.
I definitely
and I think like once especially like elected officials who have been in a seat for a long time, once they get a challenger, that will start making them look at issues more closely and start listening to the people more, because they're like, oh, okay, we felt we were safe in the seat, but we could have a challenger, so let us start seeing what it is that the people care about.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think so Drain Commissioner, I'll tell you honestly, the first thing I don't think of is environmentalism. I always think like, okay, you're handling like the water for like our
Mm-hmm.
and your job is just to make sure that it doesn't get shut off and stays clean and keeps going. I don't think about the overall environmental impact of it. So could you expand just a little bit on exactly
Mm-hmm.
what that is for the drain commissioner?
Yeah, so I think a good example, just because I was visiting there recently, there's a wetland in Lansing called Tollgate Wetlands, and it was built by the Drain Commission of Ingham County specifically for clearing up non-point source pollution, which is a fancy word for uh, fertilizers and nitrates and pollutants that are in like the soil and they get on the roads, but there isn't like a pipe that's like actually spewing these things out. It's just people spray it here and there all over the place. And when it rains, it flows into the water system and it concentrates and it becomes a pollutant. We call it a non-point source of pollution. And this wetland was developed by the Drain Commissioner's group in order to filter out these pollutants from the water and also serve as a water sequestration area, which is part of what the Drain Commissioner's job is. And what does that wetland also do? It also has wildlife. I took pictures of a ruby-crowned kinglet when I was there, which was really cute. And then they got really close. It's one of the smallest birds in Michigan, just like this big. And there was ducks, there was blue-winged teal, and there was people like jogging. There's people going out there like for picnics. There's benches, and people are using it for that recreation as well. And that all came from the Drain Commissioner's office. So I think that including projects like that into the conversation of this is what you could have. And I think there's a couple other counties in Michigan that have really cool projects like that to kind of model off of, but not everywhere does. And I think if we did, maybe we'd start thinking about the Drain Commission as being this environmental thing because you're literally managing the water. I think of it that way. You're managing the water and the water systems that flow through that entire area with your jurisdiction. And that can include places that you need to purify the water and what purifies the water for us in wetlands. So that's connected back into wildlife and recreation, and all this stuff comes together.
Yeah, most definitely.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of some of that stuff, like as the role of the Drain Commissioner.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that either. Well, just as a reminder, everyone, you are watching Dive into Young Politics with Leah and Zahara, streaming live on WJZZ Cool TV, Saturdays from 1 to 2. Please follow us and like and subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And if you would like to sponsor or advertise, you can email us at wjzzcooltvofficial@gmail.com. So I think I really love that, Andrew. Like I would have never thought of a drain commissioner being able to take on projects like that. And that's also something where you can think about, again, your city council, your drain commissioner. These are elections that are up this year for a lot of places. So getting involved in those now, I think, is a really good way for people to put their support behind the candidate that is thinking environmentally. That isn't just the developer candidate, but is going to develop green infrastructure. I think about a friend of ours, Mikhail Goodman. He's running for city council in Pontiac, and that's really what he's focusing on is this renewable green infrastructure. Something that's been a conversation in Pontiac for a minute, but that's something that they have older buildings, so their water is getting kind of risky, kind of dangerous. They need the infrastructure change, but they need good, renewable, sustainable infrastructure changes. And I think that's the difference here. It's not just putting a Band-Aid or a patch on something, but really actually getting to the root of it and solving what we have going on.
Yeah, and I think that those kinds of investments really do matter because in the long term, you're not just putting in the infrastructure that's going to clean up that problem. You're putting in the infrastructure that's going to make you more resilient to those problems in the future. And I think that piece sometimes gets missing when we're thinking about these.
Yeah, I think resilience is important. And again, we're talking about longevity for these things. I know it's a silly meme to say, but we don't have a planet B. Like we just don't. So we have to create longevity and sustainability. And I don't want us to always have to be going back in to refix something to do more damage. And also, ideally, you would be creating more jobs with the green infrastructure. And that's another side of it too, is environmental jobs, I think, that we don't think about.
I think that especially as climate change, unfortunately, it continues to get worse from this point. The role and the need for those kinds of environmental engineers and workers is going to increase. So there's a lot of jobs that honestly we'd be better off if we got those jobs in sooner rather than later when things really become problematic. But there's huge potential for this. And honestly, green jobs are growing faster than fossil fuel jobs are anyway right now. At this point in time, like we aren't even at that precipice yet, and green jobs are already the place for job growth. If you want more jobs, invest in green energy.
Yeah, most definitely.
That's really good.
And I think about some of the bills that some of our senators and House reps, Senator Irwin and Yusuf Rabi have worked on, or Representative Yusuf Rabi have worked on to change the incentives for solar panels. Just a smaller thing where like people can get like better tax returns from it now, like and more incentive for people to start investing in it. And I know it's a hard ask because it's still not cheap. I'm nowhere near being able to put solar panels on my roof. I also live in a rental, so I don't think that I can.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird dynamic because solar is cheaper. It just is. Some people who try to like argue that it's not are quoting studies from like 5 or 10 years ago. Solar is now the cheapest form of energy. So if you're powering something on solar versus coal versus natural gas, the solar is just going to win. But the issue with solar is that you have to have the money up front.
Yeah.
And then it's the solar energy, makes its return over like a 10, 15-year period, and then you make so much more because it's so much cheaper. And so for you as an individual person, that means you need all that cash up front to be able to invest in the solar energy. But then your bill is going to be cheaper over that 15-year period. And I feel like the big issue with energy right now isn't so much that we're so stuck on fossil fuels that we can't imagine the path forward, because there is this path forward. It's that people don't want to make that type of different commitment. I think it's just in terms of like a mental thing. And it's weird to me that like DTE, I don't think I'm not on DTE anymore where I'm at now, but I used to be on DTE, and they had this energy system where you could increase your bill to get green energy. So you'd be paying more so the DTE could invest in green energy, and in return, your bill would actually be green instead of running on like coal, natural gas, and so forth. And I feel like that kind of system is just completely backwards because it gives people the impression that solar is more expensive. So if I want my house from DTE powered by solar, I have to give DTE more money, but DTE is actually saving money from you. So like it's like, hey, I have this thing that's cheaper than the thing you're already buying, but you're going to pay me $5 more for this other thing that's cheaper for me to make and give it to you. And really, it's the people that keep losing when it comes down to it. And solar is complicated, and there's no panacea, giant solution to that right now. But I mean, really, what it comes down to, I think, is greed, and that realizing that solar is cheaper. Like, if you're paying DTE more money for solar, like DTE is just getting your money, and they're getting cheaper energy, and they're also getting your extra bucks for supplying you with cheaper energy.
We definitely have a problem with the companies and corporations. I know that a lot of times when our electeds are trying to introduce bills, the lobbyists for DTE and those types of things are just totally pushing back against them entirely.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a big issue. So Andrew, right now, what are your parting words to the people?
Oh boy.
Some words of wisdom. What do you got?
That I haven't already said. So know that like the environment matters. And I feel like the environmental movement kind of got labeled as this like, hey, I really care about the planet. Well, isn't that nice? It's not about, hey, I like these things because I care. It's everybody needs to like these things because it's really smart too. It's really honestly kind of dumb not to care about the environment. Because if you come back to like those services that I was mentioning earlier in the call, if you don't care about wetlands and you don't care about forests and you don't care about wildlife, it means you don't care about invasive species control, you don't care about clean water, you don't care about clean air, and you don't care about being able to have reliable sources of food, which is just ridiculous. People don't always make that connection, but push back if you meet anybody who tries to tell you that you're just a tree hugger who doesn't see the very old things. They're really the ones who probably aren't seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, I definitely think that's fair. And Andrew, how could people follow the caucus if they're interested in joining the environmental caucus?
Absolutely. So our website and Facebook is super easy to remember. It's greenmdp.com. That's GREENMDP.com. And our Facebook is facebook.com/greenmdp. And to email us, it's info@greenmdp.com. So check out our website. We've got a lot of tremendous resources on there where you can learn more about lots of different environmental issues written by people from the very state, researching these things and actually talking to people experiencing these issues. And also we have monthly meetings on the last Sunday of every month at 7, where you can actually get involved, maybe join our rapid response team and start trying to tackle some of these issues as they are in your own state.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. I definitely would encourage you guys to check out the Environmental Caucus. They're doing a lot of good work, putting a lot of pressure on electeds, and also educating the people for sure about what environmentalism is and what naturalism is. And we really appreciate you coming on today, Andrew. I think this has been a great discussion for sure. And I love that we talked about it being so intersectional. You know, we can't talk about the environment without talking about healthcare, without talking about education, without talking about jobs and infrastructure. It really is so central to everything that we're doing because it is where we live and play and work and worship and breathe. So I think that that intersectionality of it today was really conveyed well. And I hope that people realize that as they're looking at candidates and as they're getting involved in this coming election cycle, that they're really thinking about environmentalism all the way through, not just in a little corner, like you said, to go be the tree hugger for the moment, but really all the way through.
Yeah, and if you see that your elected officials or candidates do not have any insight into the environment, then, put the pressure and give them, resources to start looking at these issues.
Yeah, send them to the Environmental Caucus, right?
Nowicki, that's it.
Thank you.
You got to talk to Andrew in the Environmental Caucus. But no, for real, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about these issues. And I hope that the audience, you guys have heard some ideas, and maybe you'll spend some time outside this weekend and just kind of go enjoy nature. I know that I'm pretty fortunate to live in Washtenaw, where we have tons of parks and hiking trails. Usually you can check out your county website to see what parks they have available. I definitely encourage you to get out there and enjoy the environment.
All right, thank you. Thank you for caring about native wildlife and caring about protecting the planet and the people and our public health.
Thank you. We'll see you all next Saturday from 1 to 2 for more dive into young politics with Leah. Really good today, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.